But this Friday morning.
Yeah. Nothing better.
Look at it.
Greater package.
Wednesday.
Classic. All they're doing. That's all it is. I'll be working, but thanks for the Did you read that?
I did. I'm taking them up on it.
I know, that's what Mel said. I never if you.
Ethan, you're in better research race.
She's not here yet. Okay. I know she's coming. All right.
We'll say everything real slow.
Are you ready?
Okay. This meeting of the Livingston City Commission is called to order. May we have roll call, please?
Chairperson Bennett,
Present.
Commissioner Hoagland, here, Commissioner Friedman,
Here.
Commissioner Schwartz,
Present.
Commissioner Sandberg.
Present.
We'll now have a moment of silence. Thank you very much. Let's rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. So let's see what we have here tonight. First order of business are the consent items. Is there a motion from the commission on our consent items?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I make a motion that we pass items A, B, and C.
Right. Is there a second?
I'll second.
So there's a motion by Commissioner Friedman, a second by Commissioner Schwartz. Roll call, please.
Chairperson Bennett,
Yes?
Commissioner Hoagland,
Yes.
Commissioner Friedman,
Yes.
Commissioner Schwartz,
Four.
Commissioner Sandberg.
Four.
Motion passes. Tonight, there are no proclamations. There is one scheduled public comment. Shall we wait? Pull them in when they get here?
I told her 6:30, so.
Okay, well, we're still a minute away from that. So let's go on to the first resolution anyway, while we're waiting. The first resolution for this evening is resolution number 4769, a resolution of the City Commission of the City of Livingston, Montana, of its intent to establish a safe and accessible streets policy. Mr. Cardus.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Resolution 4769 is basically a opportunity for the commission to set a policy for safe and accessible streets. What does that mean? In general, it gives you the ability to set forth in policy what things we should consider when creating new streets, repairing old streets, changing the way traffic flows, basically any considerations that you would like to provide to the administration as policy. The Active Transportation Coalition is been working with the administration on this. They've identified some goals which were provided to you in the packet. Basically, the primary goal is safety, and mobility is really the outcome that we're looking for. So it just, as we're looking at different modes of transportation, it prioritizes safety among the most vulnerable first. So you start with pedestrians, bicycles, mopeds, motorcycles, up to passenger cars, SUVs, commercial trucks, so forth and so on. So you would set goals, policies towards how we design for those different types of transportation, when we should take them into consideration, when we should not take them into consideration, and varying degrees of importance. The Active Transportation Coalition has volunteered to work with us to develop that policy for the commission. This is your opportunity to decide whether or not that is an item you would like, and if so, if there's any guidance you would like to provide before that draft is developed.
very much. So is there any input, questions, clarification from the commission on this particular resolution? Commissioner Schwartz?
I'd just like to mention that we will be hosting, the Active Transportation Coalition will be hosting the Building Active Communities Institute this May. I attended that last May in Butte, and so we're the host this year. And a lot of what we see comes out of these whatever you want to call them, meetings and stuff like that, that provides expertise on curb extensions, safe ways to get to school, identifying safe routes and stuff like that. So that's all I have to add.
Does anyone else would like to clarification on this particular resolution? All right, is there any public comment on resolution number 4769? Is there a motion from the commission on resolution 4769?
Make a motion to approve resolution 4769.
I'll second.
So that's a motion by Commissioner Schwartz, second by Commissioner Holman. Roll call, please.
Chairperson Bennett,
Yes?
Commissioner Holden. Yes. Commissioner Friedman,
Yes.
Commissioner Schwartz,
4.
Commissioner Sandberg. 4.
Motion passes. At this point, we are going to switch gears. Maddox is present, so we invite you to go up to the, should I stand at the podium or sit at the table?
It's your choice, Morgan. What do you prefer? Doesn't matter.
Okay, and present your report.
Sorry. So I'm Morgan Starr with the Maddox CPA Group, so I'm here to present your fiscal year 2017 audit. I'm going to go over a high-level overview. I'm not going to go through financials in detail. The general gist is the financials are the city's responsibility and our responsibility.
Excuse me, Morgan, can you speak into the microphone because the people behind you can't hear you? Do we need to move it up closer?
Possible.
Matt will help you out. Or Shannon will help you out.
Mike,
Yeah, he'll help you out. Slug you in the face with your.
All right, so we're going over
That's
the
better,
fiscal
thank
year 2017 audit. I'm going to do a high-level overview. Not going to go through the financials in detail. These are the city's responsibility, and our responsibility is to issue an opinion on them based on our audit procedures. So we have two audit reports in here. One's on the financials and one's on internal control and compliance. So I'll talk through both of those. Page 2-1 is our independent auditor's report. So this is our opinion on the financial statements. There's multiple opinion units as outlined in the report. So we opine on the entity-wide statements, each major fund, and then the aggregate non-major fund information. So not each individual non-major fund. You can see all those outlined there. So our opinion on all of them, on all of our opinion units, is unmodified. So clean opinion, which is what you're looking for. The rest of that report addresses the other items in this whole packet and what, if any, assurance we give on each one of those. I say this every time, but I think it bears repeating. Right after that, so page 2-3 is management discussion and, yeah, I didn't put that to my box. That's management discussion and analysis. And so that is the most plain English that you can get in this. And so it's the narrative overview. It's about 7 pages. And if governmental financials aren't your thing, that is where I always advise people start and read. It actually puts some of them in context in terms of prior year, budget, those kinds of things. Especially when people, like the public is reading them, I think that's the best place to start. It puts some verbiage behind what actually happened.
Can you state that page once more?
Yep, it's 2-3.
2-3.
Yeah. 2-2 has our letterhead, and that's the independent auditor's reports. And then 2-3 is where the management discussion and analysis starts. So there were no new GASB pronouncements, the government accounting standards board pronouncements that impacted the city's financials significantly. There's always going to have to be pronouncements there, issuing them at alarming rates. There is one coming into play for next year that's worth mentioning. So a couple of years ago, the pension standards all changed, which is when you book this big net pension liability. A few years prior to that, the idea of OPEB, so other post-employment benefits, came into play, other than pension, so health benefits. For the city, just an implicit rate subsidy health benefits. I'm sure we talked about this. So next year, they're revamping the OPEB standards, and they're going to look a lot more like the pension standards. So a lot more disclosure on them, starting with the running multiple year schedule that you have in the required supplemental information, that kind of thing. You have an actuarial evaluation on your OPEB every 3 years, and you're up for one again, let's say next year, this year that you're in right now. So that will dovetail perfectly with that and should give you everything you need to be able to report that. But it will just get longer. That's all. That's the only thing they do. They don't take away. So we have our last report in here is at the very end, right before the statistical section. So probably the last 20 pages are statistical. Prior to that, so page 2-128 is our second report. So that's our report on internal control and compliance. Both of our reports make mention of evaluating internal controls and whatnot, but only in the context that we have to gain an understanding of the design and implementation of your controls in order to adequately audit your books, which are a result of your controls, and to make sure that we design appropriate audit procedures. But we're not engaged to give you an opinion on your internal controls. And so the only things we report here would be things that come out of any of our audit procedures. We're not giving an opinion on internal control one way or the other. So there are a couple of findings disclosed here. They start on the third page back, so 2-130. Two that we consider significant deficiencies, so those are internal control related. Two that are compliance findings. The internal control findings, the first one, so 2017-I-1, that's a repeat from last year. It relates to controls over court finances. So the first few are our finding, and then the last little blurb under each of the findings is the city's response to that. So you can see a plan in place to address that shortly. That's all I'll say on that one. So 2017 I-2 relates to segregation of duties over cash receipts that relate to the utility billing. And the general idea is you just want to be sure that you have appropriate segregation of duties to facilitate appropriate checks and balances. We just had a couple of suggestions here that could shore up any gaps in the segregation of duties with regards to those. So you can see management's response there, and the city's already addressed those and put controls in place to do so, so I don't anticipate that would be an ongoing finding either. The next page, 2-131, is the two compliance findings. The first one is a holdover from last year, and it will continue to be as long as you have budgeted deficits in those funds. That's not indicative of any problem. It's just indicative of Montana code requirements. Those will probably resolve themselves as you have additional bond proceeds or other revenues in those funds. And so I don't think that it's not a management problem. It's just Montana code says you can't budget a deficit, even if you have a plan in place for future. So that's what that one is. It will continue to be there until it resolves itself. And then the second one is, probably the most common finding we issue. So Montana code requires that you have pledged securities behind any of your funds that are in excess of like FDIC insurance or not FDIC insured. You have that, but you have to have a full minute entry of that. So a complete minute entry in your meeting minutes quarterly. And it all, every time that any staff turns over anywhere, it gets missed because it's not really a value add to anybody's day. But Montana code requires that you have that as a minute entry, and so that's already on the radar and going to be fixed. So, and then following that is the prior year findings, and so they're either repeated in the current year or they've been resolved. So I won't go over those. What questions does anybody have?
Any questions for Morgan? On she's presented so far.
Maybe just a clarification for the, sorry.
Commissioner Sandberg.
Clarification for the commissioners in regards to the GASB and what it actually stands for.
Governmental accounting standards.
Board.
Yeah, no, sure.
Folks may not,
Absolutely. Acronym world is a whole.
know
different
that
place to live.
acronym and that, it's kind of what we follow for all of our standards for how we report our finances.
Absolutely. It's what we're auditing, that you are in accordance with, accounting standards, as issued by the Governmental Accounting Standards Board. Yeah, that's what we're auditing based on. Thank you.
Anyone else? The manager, you have, Mr. Carter, do you have anything to add?
I do not.
Okay. Any public comment on our comprehensive report for this evening? All right. Is there anything else you want to?
Big thank you to your finance, department, finance manager, all, it's a big document and, requires a lot of work to go into making it. And
So you're saying it's a pleasure working with the city of Livingston?
absolutely.
Okay. Well, that's
So my
good.
next line,
Like
yes,
here.
absolutely. No, we appreciate, the ongoing relationship, yeah.
Thank you very much. We glad you came out tonight and highlighted the important stuff for us. Thank you very much. Commissioner Sanford?
I would just like to make a statement that it's only my second time I've reviewed the audit for the city, but it's really nice to see such clean audits come out of our city and to see that trend continue. So again, congratulations to the finance department. It's not usual that government entities have such clean audits, so it's nice to see.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Morgan, thank you very much. Appreciate it. It's always good to see you once a year.
Yeah. Thank you.
So we do have one action item related to this presentation, and we're going to move that up to the front right now, and that is to approve auditor's report as presented by Morgan Scar, CPA from Maddox CPA Group. Mr. Cardus, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Just that I'd like to thank Morgan as well for all the help. I know she can't hear me out there, but thanks, Morgan, for doing everything for us.
Thank you.
And we just appreciate that it was a smooth process and easily done. So we just recommend to accept the new capper into the Library of Livingston documents.
We will. I'm glad to this hefty document. We have a nice special place for it. All right, so is there a motion from the commission to accept and approve the auditor's report as presented?
I'll make a motion to accept action item A.
That's a motion by Commissioner Hoagland. Is there a second? Second. Second by Commissioner Friedman. Is there any last minute clarification from the commission or public comment? None. May we have a roll call, please?
Chairperson Bennett,
Yes?
Commissioner Holden,
Yes.
Commissioner Friedman.
Yes.
Commissioner Schwartz,
Four.
Commissioner Sandberg.
Motion passes. Our next resolution for this evening is number B, which is resolution number 4770, the resolution of the City Commission of the City of Livingston, Montana, authorizing the city manager to enter into a professional service agreement with the Northside Transportation Study. Mr. Cardis?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This resolution, we looked at in the last meeting in the draft format. This will authorize the city or myself to sign the contract with TD&H and Martin and Associates to begin the conduct of the Northside Transportation Study, which basically is going to look at future alternate routes on the north side, specifically the northwest side, the extension of Front Street, possible connector of Meredith Ranch Road, a separated grade crossing, and then any other traffic flow issues specific to that area. We talked about most of the issues in the last meeting. The thing I would like to point out in this particular resolution may be worded differently than it has been in the past, so I just wanted to make that distinction clear. This is to authorize the city manager to sign, but it also authorizes me to execute the contract to include the contingency, which in this case is $4,000 contingency. Obviously, I will report back to the commission all the funds that are spent, but this is a not to exceed contract, So the commission would be authorizing me to manage it up to $44,300, which is listed there on the legislative action summary. So that's probably worded a little differently than it has been in the past. I think it's a nice delineation of duties, and you know exactly what you're getting for the cost. The only thing I would add is that this is a contract that's for time spent. So this is an estimate of time that's going to be spent on it. If less time is spent, it will cost less. If more time is spent, it will cost more. And obviously, you're only authorizing up to $44,300. So if for some reason there's a significant amount of extra time that is needed, we need to come back before the commission and request anything in excess of that amount.
Thank you very much. Is there any questions for clarification on resolution number 4770 by the commission at all? Commissioner Hoagland?
Can you clarify transportation impact fees for us as far as how they're used within our community by the city to assist in our transportation?
Sure. So transportation impact fees are fees that come in from developers as they as they look for their permitting and their licensing. Those fees are then sequestered for transportation issues. So in this case, that would be transportation studies, actual constructions of roads or repair, curb gutter, storm drainage, anything that is for the transportation specifically. Could also include bike paths or other transportation, multimodal transportation. It's not necessarily just streets, but it does have to do with transportation.
Anyone? Commissioner Sandberg?
So the additional 9,000 that wasn't budgeted for, you have it coming out of the impact fees of the 235. What else? I know most recently we've approved a few other items to come out of there. So what are the other items? So what is the true balance then in that account?
I think we may have, I don't think we've actually have any solid, we've looked at things that were going to be funded out of transportation impact fees, but I don't think we've actually funded anything lately, except possibly some of the O Street connector.
Oh, that's what it was.
Yeah.
So is it possible when we get these funding impacts or fiscal analysis assumptions that it doesn't just show the transportation impact fee beginning balance, but it shows also the other items that we've discussed during the year that have come out or could come out, so we can see the whole picture of what's happening with that balance year to date?
We can, although does O Street money come out in FY18 or 19?
It's budgeted for this year.
It's
But
budgeted for this year. I'm not sure it's going to make it for this year, but yes, we can.
It just helps us keep track of
Sure.
truly what we are pulling out of there that we may lose track of during the year. Thank you.
Is there anyone else? Is there any public comment on resolution 4770? Public comment?
Good evening, Don Platt, 229 South Yellowstone.
Excuse me, Don. I'm sorry. Could you bring the microphone just a little closer, because it's, you have to almost be right on top of it for the people in the back to hear you.
Don Platt, 229 South Yellowstone. I asked the commission to vote no on resolution 4770. So here are some points I'd like to offer that I hope you consider. First, the city seems to have a history of funding projects, but taking little or no action based on those projects. So unless someone can explain how that's been corrected, why spend $40,000 of taxpayer money? Maybe not do something with it. So that's just one point I hope you consider. Another is a benefit to the taxpayer. You know, as a taxpayer, I expect some kind of benefit from my tax dollars. I don't really see a benefit here. I mean, I can kind of look at that area, apply a little common sense. You know where the traffic flows. Either goes to 90 or, you know, comes into town. The residents up there, they need access across the railroad tracks somewhere on Highway 10. I don't know why we need a study and $40,000 to say, yep, you need some kind of access to come over the railroad tracks. So again, I think just apply some common sense, save the taxpayers a lot of money. And I would just like to make a comment, not necessarily a point of why I think it's a poor decision to spend the $40,000. That's a contentious area. I see it. Overpass, underpass, nobody wants to make a decision. So somebody comes up with an idea, hey, let's fund the study, give them parameters, give the engineering firm parameters that we receive the answer we want. Go ahead, do something, if anything's done at all, but you do something. And then if the taxpayer's not happy, go, well, the study told us to do it, so nobody's accountable. So I just ask, let's not spend this $40,000, what appears to me to have no benefit at all to the taxpayer. Use some common sense. I think you'll get the same result. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for signing in. Is there any other public comment on resolution 4770?
I would ask the city commission to table this resolution, if you would please consider that. I did get a hold of the city manager's notes to all of the commissioners starting in April. And on a regular basis, there was a note that said, looking into underpass. As a citizen, I'm curious exactly what that meant.
Might interrupt for a minute, Patricia. I forgot to get you to state your name and address.
Oh, I'm sorry, Patricia Fabo, 204 East Calvary Street.
Thank you very much.
So I looked at meetings, and at no point did I see that the city commission had said we want an underpass as access to the north side of town. I mean, it was never in the public eye. The public had no opportunity to see the commission's rationale on this. It's just every single note that the city manager had, he said looking into underpass. So what I would suggest is that it's a questionable thing for the public to encounter this. And if we could possibly consider, because I was at the last meeting, and basically the rationale for the transportation study was to give credence to the spot that the city manager had picked. And I had been in conversation with Printing for Less, in which there had also been a conversation between the city manager and Andrew Field, the head of Printing for Less, and he said, yeah, the city manager and I have been talking, and we would like the underpass to take place where the road comes out from Printing for Less. And I was puzzled by that, because then here we have a $40,000 transportation study. The public has no awareness of all of this. And I'm just asking for a protocol. I'm asking, please, as a city commission, do not approve this tonight. Allow the public to find out the rationale of the city commission on this, and allow us to have some sort of public discussion. There's been none. It wouldn't hurt to table it until the public could look into it. Would hurt nobody to table it. I mean, it doesn't have to be done right away. There's nothing pressing on it. And it was stated at the last city commission meeting that it was kind of a rationale for that location and it being an underpass. Without a vote of the city commission to go for either an overpass and underpass. I want to say one other thing. I've spent a lifetime as an environmental advocate. And when I ran for office, I wanted an overpass. The only reason I wanted it was because I did not want our wetlands impacted, and I did not want our watersheds impacted. And as much as you can say that if you're going to go into that particular location with an underpass, you will impact those wetlands. And as a whole, the environmental community is just beginning to be aware of what this is. And they're asking for this discussion. they're asking for us to be able to communicate with our leaders on this. Please give us an opportunity to discuss the impact on our wetlands. That is where the antelope give birth. And I have a lifetime of effort in the environmental area. And the only reason I wanted it, the overpass and to be where I had suggested it when I ran for office, was because it does not impact wetlands and watershed. And please consider tabling this tonight.
Thank you very much. Is there any other public comment on resolution number 4770? Any other public comment? All right, commission discussion. Does anyone have any points for clarification on this particular resolution? Discussion, Commissioner Sandberg.
Everyone knows I'm not a fan of studies, and we have in the city a history of spending a lot of money on studies and not implementing any of them. And I take spending taxpayer money very seriously. So when I look at this study, I'm not sure what we're studying as well. We as a commission haven't decided that we want to put a at-crossing at any particular location, but yet this study is focused on a suggested locale for an at-crossing, which there's no consensus here if that's where we would like to see it. I would rather see an analysis of what would be the best spot to have a crossing, which of course we've already done before and have that information. So I struggle with spending $40,000 to have somebody confirm a crossing site that I'm not sure is the best site. I don't know if it is or it isn't because we haven't done an analysis. So, you know, the other thing with that is a crossing at that location will require street extensions, which may or may not be a good idea. I'm not saying one way or the other. We haven't seen an analysis of that. But there's a lot of additional infrastructure that would be involved for crossing that far out. And I worry when I look at the expenses the city has compounded over the years with the water reclamation facility, the actual expense of the crossing, and then any additional road infrastructure that would be added to it. You know, my taxes went up 15% last year. And we have a low mean income in this community. And I struggle with the balance of folks being able to continue to, should I say, the balance of tax increases on our citizens and the increases that they may or may not be receiving with their current employment. So at this point, I'm not ready to invest the $40,000 for to have somebody tell us, yeah, you could do this, and this is, we'll help you figure out how to design it. So that's just my thoughts. So thank you.
Commissioner Schwartz.
Just to clarify, none of this is being done by an engineering outfit, right? This is just identifying problems and solutions to the future. So, I mean, they could say, yeah, be nice to have a crossing out here, but that's not, I was led to believe last week that's not their intent. You know, the city manager certainly more than welcome to talk about it and, spitball with people and stuff like that. But I have concerns about spending the money too. I mean, I'd rather spend the money to see the viability of a different location for a crossing further west. Although I'm sure that $40,000 being small tickets, correct? I have a engineering firm look at it. So, and there's something beside for common sense. I guess that's all I have to say. We don't have that map identifying where we were going to do the studies. And it's just
It should be two, there's,
that was last week. Mhm. Oh yeah.
this
Oh,
map,
that's right. Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah, that's right. That was identified. I'm trying to get clear in my mind where we were counting and studying. But, yeah, thank you. I yield.
Thank you very much. Other commissioners, clarification? Mr. Hoagland?
So, Mike, this is a question I think only you could answer, but what are some other, what are some of our other options moving forward on this project beyond this study? Or
so this,
other than this study, how do we move forward to get a crossing?
well, this is really the first step. Either we go back to where we were and use the design that's already implemented and build it where it was designed. That's an option. Or we go forward and try and figure out other locations, which is basically, this is the first step in determining if there's other viable locations and where they should be. So just to correct a couple of, I would say, factual errors. We've been talking about this for months. We had the working session with the map, with the public, with the commission, that showed all of these things that we're talking about. I believe it was on the front page of the Enterprise article that talked about these things. So these are obviously things that we've talked about with the public. I've talked about them in multiple public forums to try and get the information out of them. So public's been aware of the possibility of this plan, which is what it's always been presented as a possibility. Yes, we came up with an idea and we presented it to the engineers and then said, hey, is this the right place? The traffic engineers, not the building engineers. Or is there a better place? And so that's really the intent of the study, is for them to look at the possible corridors and say, is there a better spot west of Star Road that would be? So we're going to get that information from this study. So that's the first step, is what's the best location for it. Additionally, I've talked to a lot of people about where the crossing should go, because that's my job. I need to get public input on where it should go. So absolutely, if we could tie it into an existing intersection, that's always the best, because the traffic geometry is already done by the state. We already know an intersection can go there. That's one thing we don't have to study. We talked the feasibility with both MRL and state to determine if we could get right-of-ways to the pieces of land we need to. I've had some of those conversations. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff that I've discussed with a lot of people on this issue, just to see if it's even a possibility. We're not tied to anything. We don't need to extend Front Street. I think it's a really good idea. It's a good idea for growth, and it's a good idea for safety based on the traffic flow coming out of these main roads right now. We don't necessarily need a crossing at all. There isn't a traffic study that said there is a significant problem with traffic crossing the tracks. It is an inconvenience, but it is not a safety issue, and it is not an issue for emergency services right now. So it is not required by anything that we have any kind of crossing. But if we're looking at expansion, we're looking at the future, really that's what this study does, is it doesn't model stuff that's already out there that you can see through common sense. It's really looking at what are the loads and where is the traffic going. So if we do make an extension to Front Street and a crossing further west, will people use it? Or is that not where the traffic is going? And that's what this study is going to help us determine, is it worthwhile in that position? If you do look back at this study in 2007, it said it wasn't worthwhile to put one further west. But that was a decade ago, and there's a significant amount of development that's happened in that time. There's a significant amount that's forecasted. So this will give us a new look at that. We're also pushing on the deadline of the grant that we received from the Department of Transportation. If we don't start something, where are we at, Jim? What time?
2019.
Yeah, if we don't start something by 2019, that is just over $1 million, $1.5 million.
The earmarks are a little over $1 million.
Yeah, just a little over $1 million that we'll have to pay back to the Department of Transportation. So we are on a time crunch. 2019 seems a long ways away, but it's 2018 in 2 weeks. So it's not something we can delay for a significant amount of time, or we're going to end up with a bill from the Department of Transportation. So we need to make some decisions on if we're moving forward, and if we're not moving forward, how we plan to pay that money back. And if we are moving forward, make sure that we're doing it the way. While I like my ideas, and I think they're good ideas, I'm certainly not a traffic engineer, and I wouldn't start a project based on my opinion. So that's the reason for this stuff, is that we get a professional look at it and say, yes, your ideas are good, or no, your ideas are not good, and here's what we would recommend. And so you can see that the area, if you look at it, is pretty much the entire northwest side. It'll include some numbers for Northtown once it starts being developed. It'll include some of the Discovery Vista numbers, some projected growth that they're modeling as well. So it's important, if we're going to do these projects, you know, it's that double-edged sword, right? We don't want to spend the money because we're afraid we're not going to move forward, but if we don't spend the money, we're not going to move forward. There's just nowhere to go. This is the first step. There will be a lot of other studies that will have to be done if we want to do this. There will have to be environmental impact studies, engineering studies. There's a significant amount of work that will have to be done, and there's a significant amount of money that will have to be spent if we want this infrastructure. But this is the first step in that, you know, is it worth $40,000 to determine if we want to spend the tens of millions that will have to go into a full project, or the $5 to $7 million that will go into just a crossing, depending on where it is. So that's why I would recommend going forward with it. Those are all issues that definitely need to be addressed. But I think this is the first step in getting you the analysis you need to make the decisions. Because if we don't do this, then what are we basing that analysis on? How do we make those decisions without some real information from real experts in the area? Very much.
Still off the floor, Commissioner Holden.
I'm waiting. Thank you.
Is there any other commissioner who would like to provide some insight, clarification? Oh, yeah, Commissioner Sandberg.
On the last one we looked at, it actually had traffic counts showing on Highway
Can you
10.
speak into the microphone? Sorry.
Sorry, the last one that we saw, the picture at the previous meeting was showing some traffic counts on Highway 10. Are those not there anymore?
No, this graphic is the one from the traffic study that's already completed,
Oh,
because that was the one you had requested last time. Was
oh,
to see
gotcha.
where the other
So
counts
this
were.
was in addition to the other one.
So this is the one that's already completed. These traffic counts have already all been accomplished. And any of this information, obviously Marvin Associates also did this study, so they will have this complete information available to them as they go forward.
Mhm. And, no, that's fine. And what happens when, after the study, they find that that place is not gonna work?
It depends on what they find. If they find that no place will work, then we know that our options are to put it where we were originally planning or not do one, or look for another location. So that's why it really has to be the first step, is we have to determine the feasibility of even moving forward at this point.
So I guess I was under the impression, because it had the specific traffic counts out at the Printing for Less and close to the truck stops, so maybe I misunderstood. I thought in the document they provided, it stated that they would be looking at a crossing at that position and the feasibility of it at that position. Not that they wouldn't be looking at other positions, but to me, it sounded as though that was a main focal point.
But really, they're looking at the farthest west one, which would be where we hook up with Meredith. And so that's the reason that particular spot is being looked at, is because there's another artery that's going to come down from the north and would intersect there. And obviously, we prefer to put a crossing at intersections of arteries and not at one spot on an artery.
But again, those roads aren't developed, so we would have to develop them.
We would have to develop those roads. Either way, they're going to need those counts out for Print for Less and further on, because what they'll do is they'll amalgamate, they'll aggregate that information to really get a flow for where the traffic is going. How much traffic is taking Highway 10 to Print for Less? How much traffic is taking Highway 10 out to the intersection on I-90? Because that will determine how many of those intersections will get used. If most of the traffic is going to Print for Less and not going out to I-90, it may indicate that there's a better location for a crossing. Or if most of the traffic is going out to I-90 or half, that'll inform them about the best place for crossing to be the traffic patterns that are established in Livingston currently.
Are we kind of limited though due to Fleshman Creek what our options can be anyway? I mean, it's not as if we have a wide corridor to work with.
Actually, Fleshman Creek crosses right there at Star, so it crosses the railroad and Highway 10 right there, so Fleshman Creek isn't there. There is that feeder that does have some limiting capability, but most of the real, I would say, environmental issues are going to be the wetlands next to Print for Less, which is actually across the road.
And I guess I wasn't thinking environmental. I was thinking of, went back to your connection with artery streets. And so when we look at where those main streets are established right now, there aren't a lot out there. I mean, basically, I guess you're looking at hooking up with Meredith Ranch Road or Star Road. I mean, those are the two main arteries.
Those would be the two main arteries, that's right.
So are they really going to be looking at anything but those two?
They'll look in between. I mean, they'll look at, again, it depends on traffic flow. If for some reason, and that may inform where you take Meredith Ranch Road, because right now that is a pretty blank canvas out there. So you could bend the road, you could change the geometry to bring Meredith Ranch Road into whatever location was most convenient for a crossing. Right now you're only limited by access to some of the private property. I think there's one spring out there that you would have to be careful of. And other than that, there's a pretty wide open geography for it. You would have to work with the landowners to see if they'd be willing to trade our current easement for an adjusted easement, depending on what the recommended route for the road is.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other commission input? So what we have here is we're all communities familiar with the underpass project at the intersection of Front and Star Road. We're aware of that, and that for the last 7-8 years, we have put a lot of time and effort into trying to move that project forward, and at the same time try to find the appropriate funding for that, which we were never able to garnish from federal government, in essence, because we've received a lot of help from the state government. We have banked a lot of our transportation reserves, from my understanding, to use those from the state in order to move that project forward. But it's always been stalled by not having the large influx from the federal side of things in order to fund that project. So in the light of not seeing a future where that can actually be funded, and looking at other possibilities, you know, I think as I look at this map over here, and I think most of you can see it over here as well, as we move west with the development in the Northern Lights and Discovery Vista, and I believe that even once Discovery Vista is fully developed, there's proposals on the table for further westward movement. Am I correct in that? Has there been?
So the growth policy, I think, very clearly illustrates that.
Yeah. So we're moving that direction, and what's going to happen if you look at the streets as they stand right at the moment, you're going to start to funnel all the traffic through residential areas, meaning everything to the west is going to go through, what are those roads? Sun, and what's that other one? No, there's the one on the north side there. Curve. What is that? No, that's not Northern Lights. No, that's not. Constellation. It's one of those star names. Anyway, and that comes out, and they can either go up Northern Lights out to Star Road, or they can come down through Comet Boulevard and then get Sun and then go over to Star Road. So what we're going to be doing, if we don't do something, even if we did have the underpass, overpass at the crossing there, we're going to still funnel all that new residential area through those residential development through the residential areas, creating a lot more traffic through there. So the thought of diverting that traffic through a feeder road or an extension to Front Street, out towards Meredith Ranch Road, because that's a logical spot. And I think, I believe that the city has a right-of-way with Meredith Ranch Road, is that correct? So we have a right-of-way already existing that goes across those tracks, and it hasn't been determined whether it's going to be an at-grade, underpass, overpass. That's what I think possibly maybe we may be able to gather some information by the study. But the other key component in this is not just doing a study and not realizing that, development is happening as Bozeman prices for housing gets more expensive. More people are going to move to the outlying communities and property. They're going to be moving to Belgrade, and Belgrade's pretty well developed right now. People move out to Manhattan, Three Forks, and Livingston's a logical spot. And what you're finding is that people are building out there. I've talked to some of the home builders out there. They're building smaller houses and getting more money. So the housing prices are going up out there. So we're either going to do nothing and have to pay the money back to the state because we're never going to fund the underpass, or we're going to do something and indicate to the state that we are trying to develop something and moving forward, and we won't have to pay that money back. The other key component in this is for the commission and the administration to develop new impact fees for new development, because that is one funding source that we'll need to look at in order to pay for any type of project, whether it be an underpass or an extension out to Meredith Ranch Road. So there's a lot of moving parts in order for us to pull something like this off. But if we do have development continuing out that regard, we're going to put more strain on Fifth Street. We're going to put more strain on B Street. And yes, it's an inconvenience at this point to cross there during the rush time, getting kids to school and getting to work, 7:30 to 8:30. And the time people get off at work, it's not as bad, I don't think. I think there's more of a dispersion of times crossing there. So, it could get to the point where it does become a traffic problem. There are, so what are we left with? We're left with the idea of we need to figure out a solution. I mean, if we don't, there is no solution, or if we think we don't want to spend the money on trying to figure out a solution, which is an option, then we just let the developments plan themselves, and we don't develop any type of traffic analysis to try to figure out what do we do with now all these new people coming. My understanding was, as far as the state goes, my understanding was they weren't putting a lot of pressure on us. Now, that may be because we're waiting until 2019, but if 2019 comes around, which is a year away, and they're saying, okay, well, you guys aren't trying to do anything now because you can't get the money for the underpass, and you're not trying to look at some other way to relieve the traffic, which was one of the key components for having another rail crossing. It just looks like you guys spun your wheels and now we'd like our money back. Now that's going to be, we're talking about money hitting the taxpayer. That's a way bigger chunk of money to hit the taxpayer to pay that back. Glad I won't be on the commission to make that decision. Warren will be. Thank you, Warren. So even though I agree, I mean, when I first got on the commission 8 years ago, I just really dislike studies. And spending money on studies. From the studies I've seen for the last 8 years, every study that has been done has actually gotten utilized. I can't name one that hasn't gotten utilized. I know there's been studies in the past that have gotten shelved, or maybe they were ahead of their time, or maybe they were behind their times. But I remember one of the first studies we did was a recreational study, and I thought, oh, I'm not going. I voted against it. And what happened is that is the template that the Parks and Trails Committee uses in order to move projects forward. That's how we've gotten things done. So, you know, I was wrong in my perspective then, and I learned from that. So I think that the real key here is what's more expensive, to spend $40,000 in order to do something to find out if this is the appropriate way for Livingston to go, or to wait and do nothing and spend $1 million to pay back the time we spent on the last underpass project. You know, to me it's clear what we need to do. We need to either we do it at this meeting or a following meeting. If the commission wants a table, they certainly can. But I don't know what other information we're going to need in order to decide whether to do it or not. The idea of doing studies does, you're right, the gentleman put it correctly, it does divert the attention from your elected officials and your administration, mainly because we're looking for someone who has the professional development to understand what we're asking for. I mean, we can make this decision and say, we can spitball it and say, yeah, this is a great idea, and then find out that, no, there's a few things we didn't really consider because we don't know what we're talking about. I think you would prefer having your representatives at least hire an expert to do an expert job in a field rather than us just thinking that we can do it there. Like the city manager says, there's a lot of components to this. This is just the first step. We're going to have to look at the environmental aspects of it. We're going to have to look at the lay of the land. We're going to have to look at land purchases. We're going to have to look at right-of-ways. And we're going to have to look at, you know, how this affects, oh, sorry, Quentin, that went too long, honey. Should I call for a break here?
No, you're okay.
Okay.
I can hear you all without.
Yeah, I think there's a speaker in the restroom. All right. So, from my perspective, we can do nothing or do something. Nothing's more expensive than something at this point. So I'm voting for something. So, did I go over 4 minutes? All right. So is there, before we get to, excuse me, more public comment, is there any other commission?
Yeah, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Yeah, you and I being the oldest on this commission, this has been hanging over our heads for a whole while with a lot of money sitting out there. So I understand $40,000, but we've got big numbers if something doesn't happen. So I've been worried about this for a long time. And we got to start at some point. So time is not on their side. All things considered, people remarks, they're good remarks. But there's always a caveat of something else going on. So big numbers if something doesn't happen. So I've been worried about this for quite a while. So I yield.
Mr. Hoagland?
Well said, by the way. Oh, I think you laid out a lot of what the issue is here that we've been talking about for 4 years. And then before that, how many more? But I think the frustration I'm having is that it seems like no matter what we want to to vote, or what we vote on, what we vote for, there's always going to be someone who doesn't like it when it comes to the underpass, overpass issue, which we have in the past voted to continue the discussion on the underpass versus the overpass. That was a decision. We have asked our city manager to bring things to the table, another decision. But it is time that we actually do something and move it forward, because I feel like I'm up to here with information and not moving it forward, and we're not going to please anyone, it seems like some days, but in the reality of it, we need to move something, because I've been on the planning board for 4 years and everything is moving that way. There's a few things moving out past Bennett Street, and people are moving to that area of our community, and Bozeman people are going to move to that area of our community, and we have to consider more than just the new people, but the fact that every person I work with that lives on the north side complains every day about the problem, and it's time. And if this is just one of our steps to make it happen, I'm for it.
Is there any public comment before, yes, I was gonna say commissioner, maybe. Sure to state your name and address for the record.
Patricia Grabo, 204 East Callender Street. We have spent a lot of money on studies. We did $1.2 million worth of studies, studying an underpass. We did a study of an overpass, and the conclusion that it was $19 million to do an overpass. In fact, Dick Anderson came up with $9 million. So there are studies, and then there are studies. Dick Anderson, in fact, worked with me and Steve Coons looking at where Meredith, where Northern Lights comes out. Now that was created by Bob Weimer to be where the overpass was to go, and he was in favor of an overpass. And Dick Anderson estimated about $6.5 million to do an overpass as opposed to an underpass. Underpass is double the cost. When you look at where the city manager is looking at where Printing for Less road comes out, that's going to be an underpass. Any place where the land has the streams and the wetlands have eaten out the soil so it's lower is where this city is looking at an underpass. Intelligently, I mean, we love the underpass over at the airport, but that's gravel. These are wetlands that we are looking at putting an underpass into. It's like they're a conduit. They can turn into a culvert if there were a flood. But if you look at the contour of the land, you have a high area, and then you have Fleischer Creek, and then you have the spring that comes right out at a federal wetlands at Printing for Less. And getting approval on a federal wetlands is a huge, huge process, as opposed to putting just a simple $6.5 million overpass where Northern Lights comes out. The entire subdivision was designed to come out where Northern Lights comes out, and it is a simple bridge. It's not complicated. It doesn't dig into the ground. It doesn't dig into the water source. It doesn't destroy a spring. It doesn't destroy a river. It destroys nothing. It just is a bridge, and an inexpensive bridge. It could be a design build project, and having had numerous conversations with Dick Anderson about this, it is just such a reasonable thing to hit the highlands, the high area, a simple bridge across the railroad tracks, and even the road is high at that point. It makes it very easy, and it could be done well within the guidelines, so that we wouldn't lose that $100,000 that we could obviously lose. Please consider the lay of the land, the way the water flows when you consider this. And that is not being taken into consideration because that location the city manager has decided on is going to be an underpass. You don't have a choice. So please consider this. Please don't jump to this conclusion so quickly before you really know, have a sense of the cost. Please.
If I may respond to that, I'd like to say that this study may show that that's the place. It's possible. So I think it's very open at this spot, at this time. Any more public comment? Please come on up. Be sure to state your name and address for the record.
Warren Navy, 310 South H Street, Livingston. In terms of whether to do something or do nothing at this point, I think one major factor hasn't been mentioned, and I could be wrong, and correct me if I am, the possible lot development sites on the north side, the possible ones, not the current ones, total something like 800. So at some point, somewhere down the road, there's going to be a tremendous difference in traffic flow. Another factor is that, and I'm not the expert on this either, but impact fees, I don't know how recently they've been revised, but they have to be revised by a professional organization, and that's a $15,000 to $20,000 cost. Again, if they're not current, I think that would be another very wise investment at this point. But the 800 possible developed sites on the north side puts a whole different perspective on the traffic now versus the traffic then. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just to dovetail on that, I think every 5 years we have to revise our impact fees. And I think we're due for that. Is that correct? Yeah. It's been on our radar. We've discussed it several times. Mr. Hoagland?
Mike, another question. Where in this document does it state that you have chosen actual location?
It is not.
I didn't think so, but I didn't want to miss anything. From your experience as a city manager, are you just looking at this study as a guide to a potential place, to multiple places, to one particular place? Could you explain your kind of
What I hope to get out of
use
this,
with
and
from it?
and some of this will come through negotiations with Bob Martins as they start to go through it, is we would like options. We'd like the recommendations of, hey, we think this is the best place, but you could also build one here. Here's the pros, here's the cons. That's really what we're looking for, is the options. And then we can, because some of these options will be best for traffic flow, which is what a traffic engineer is going to be concerned with. A different spot may be best for cost. And so you have to balance all these options together. You have to look at cost, you have to look at traffic flow, you have to look at maintenance, you have to look at how it affects the infrastructure of the other streets. So it's not in a vacuum that you're looking at one, one specific criteria. I assume that they're going to give us some options on what we can do based on what we say our priorities are. And obviously you're going to balance those against each other. Like if the perfect traffic flow one is going to cost you an extra $10 million, it's probably not the answer. But if there's a good traffic flow option that's a small amount more, then that's the kind of place you want to look. So I hope to get a range of options based on predictions of future growth and what what our current traffic flow is and how they model that into the future.
So it will also help answer road extension possibilities, not just location, but road extensions, traffic flow for future development. What streets basically people will be most likely using from their analysis. Correct.
And some of this will also go into the new subdivisions going up. So it's not just west of Star Road. If you look at the map, it also includes some of the areas where Northtown is going to be, and actually goes quite a ways east, a lot further east than we're talking about currently. So it's looking at total flow of traffic. So it's also the crossings, Fifth Street, and there may be other options to go with this, and they can dovetail with the current recommendations for traffic flow at Front and Fifth, at Fifth and Park. Since they've already made those recommendations in the setting review seat this summer, they can use those as they look forward at where's this other traffic going to go. What's the traffic from Northtown going to do? If there's expansions out there, if there's new trails, where's that traffic flowing currently? It's also going to look at, do we need more connectivity from the plateau down to Star? Does there need to be another way for people to get from the top to the bottom if they're headed westbound, or people coming in from the county? So it's going to look at a lot of stuff more than just an extension to Front Street where the separated grade crossing should go.
Commissioner Sandberg.
How much of that was done in the previous study from 2007? Did they do, I would assume that they would have done a traffic analysis and a growth analysis as well, because the market hadn't quite crashed by then, and we were in quite a boom at that time with huge speculation of growth. So, hating to spend money for the same information twice, I would assume that some of that would have been done back in 2007.
Well, and actually, not only 2007, just this summer, and that's one of the reasons using Marvin Associates is actually a really good deal, because they have that entire body of information available to them, and we shouldn't have to pay for. They don't have to redevelop some of those models and projections. They just have to update them to include how the growth is looked out west, current developments that we know are coming, and then add those to the information they already have.
And do you know what we paid for that study in 2007?
2007 study, I can't say off the top of my head. What we paid for that.
Does any commissioner that was here remember? Roughly?
I don't think any of us were here.
You weren't there? Okay. Hopefully you tell. Okay. Thank you.
Any other points of clarification, Commission? Any last public comment at all? Is there a motion from the Commission?
I'll make a motion to approve resolution 4770.
Second. That's a motion by Commissioner Sports, second by Commissioner Friedman. Roll call, please.
Chairperson Bennett,
Yes.
Commissioner Holton,
Yes.
Commissioner Friedman,
Yes.
Commissioner Schwartz,
4.
Commissioner Sandberg.
4.
Motion passes. Moving on to resolution number C, which is resolution number 4771, a resolution of the City Commission of the City of Livingston, Montana, authorizing the city manager to sign all documents required to execute the city manager's recommendation for amendment number 2 to the water reclamation facility professional services agreement with AE2S. Mr. Cardus?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't think I have a lot to add to this one. This is the third time this has been before the commission. The only new information provided in the packet was the letter from the Public Works Director on some of the rationale behind the amounts we looked at for reimbursing A2F compared to what their requests were. One additional piece of information, and Shannon, correct me if I'm wrong on this one, is that this amendment has now been also reviewed by USDA. Did Steve look at it?
It is not, no.
I thought Steve told me, or I think Scott told me today that Steve looked at it.
I'm not sure.
At least they've done an initial review of it. There hasn't been any concerns from the USDA. So, and this one, all of these go through USDA as well, since they are a funding source. So they will review them and they approve whether or not they approve it. So that's just a little piece of information. I think that was reviewed today, but I can't guarantee that. So assume it's not, and that's all I have. I'd hate to be wrong.
Right, so we have reviewed this on several occasions. Start off, was there any public comment on resolution 4771? Any public comment on resolution 4771? Is there a motion from the commission on resolution 4771?
I make motion to approve resolution 4771.
I'll second.
So motion by Commissioner Schwartz, a second by Commissioner Hoagland. Final commission discussion, clarifications, concerns. Commissioner Sandberg.
I think some of the concerns I still have is, some of the issues that were, on page 59, talking about the equalization, the basins, the anaerobic, and those type of things, and those came up, were stated, they came up later. And I still kind of throw the onus on the engineering firm for that, because they did have a analysis stage where they came in and they did an analysis. And so I'm wondering why those important items wouldn't have been part of that analysis from the get-go. And I think they should have been. And the fact that it's concerning to me that they were skipped. The other thing is in regards to the grant amount, which I still think is excessive. I called a grant writing company and inquired with the information I had compared to the information that they had. And I have information I can share with you if anybody wants to look at it, but this company did a USDA grant for Boulder, Montana, for a wastewater treatment plant to get a $2 million loan, well, $3.5 million loan and a $1.7 million grant. So a total of $4.2 million. And for them to fill out the USDA grant for that, they charged $9,600. It was also pointed out to me that most of the information for these grants, this company who works with the USDA quite frequently and works with primarily municipalities, actually stated that the USDA is the easiest to work with, and that in their experience, and had provided me 2 wastewater reclamation facilities that they work with in the state, that it's the TSEP grant that is the difficult one, and once that's done, everything else kind of just falls into the flow. And their guesstimations, and again, their figures are similar to the figures that we received for funding, were 40 hours worth of work. And then I think the firm here was discussing 500 hours worth of work. And a lot of that TSEP grant, we actually had a grant writer at the time. So I know she did a lot of that work. I'm still not comfortable with the figures that these people are asking for. I just don't feel it's qualified or justified. The other thing that I ran across outside, the one thing that I saw in there is we did specifically ask for some design changes, so I can see that that's a legitimate change order. So I wouldn't have a problem with that. But the other thing that I ran across in reviewing this for the umpteenth time was on page 58 in regards to the permit. What's the exact terminology they used? Procurement of the permit. And in the last paragraph on page 58, Advanced Engineering and Environmental Services goes on to talk about the improvement in the city's discharge requirements, and they were able to get this permit that has a relaxation of the ammonia limit and a complete removal of total nitrogen and phosphorus limits. So that just kind of struck me as, I guess I wasn't aware of when we procured the permit, what exactly maybe since we weren't part of the negotiation process, I guess I didn't realize what we were negotiating in regards to the ammonia, nitrogen, and phosphorus limits that we were allowed to discharge, because we weren't part of that process. I realize overall that it's better than what we're doing, but I'm just not exactly sure what this means. I do understand that the USDA approved it. I'm not sure it means it's the best decision that was made. So that has nothing to do with the funding, but they want, well, it does have to do with the funding and the fact that they want to get reimbursed for the expenses they did to negotiate that permit. So I guess for me, based on that information, I'm just not feeling comfortable with their figures. And I don't feel it's justified for us to pay these change orders, except for the design changes. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other commission discussion? Any last minute public comment?
I do have one just confirmation, Chairman. Brian and Scott, he texted me and said that Karen Sanchez from USDA has reviewed this amendment and is in concurrence with it. So that is confirmed.
Mr. Cardos, do you have any? What's that? Right. Okay. So do you have any other follow up with that at all?
I don't. No.
Okay. All right. So time for decision. Commission, is there a motion on the table? I mean, is there a motion from the commission? There is a motion. Oh, we're on a D, we're on C, excuse me. All right, thank you very much. All right, so there's no more discussion from public or commission. And we have Commissioner Hoagland.
I know you began the presentation aspect of it with discussing the reasoning behind. Could you, I mean, because this was a concern the last time we were together discussing this, just the validity of each section of the request and or your recommendation. Could you just, I guess, like in Sarah's case, I'm talking about the design contingency, so numbers, understanding the changes in that. Could you help us to understand the reasoning for each of the recommendations and a little more clearly?
Sure. So if you look at the city banner recommendation column, you start from the bottom and go up. I think that's probably the easiest. The bidding requirements just was an extension of the bid process because some of the changes that came in during the bid process that went longer than we expected. So it's just more hours spent on the bid process itself. We think that's appropriate. 35 they asked for. Actually agree with Commissioner Sandberg on some of the design contingencies. We also agreed that not all of those were additional, that they should have thought of them during the design phase, which is why we're actually only recommending less than 50% of what they requested. Some of them were absolutely new design things, and we feel that the 49,000 that we're representing is a good reimbursement for the extra work we had asked them to do. But the extra up to 120,000, we felt the same way that they should have caught that in the design phase, so that's why we're not recommending that full amount to A2S. The procurement of the permit, I don't know if there was actually an objection to that other than just the getting a relaxed permit itself. But I will just throw in there that if we had not gotten a relaxed permit, that was a more stringent permit than was anticipated from DEQ, because that's obviously a new permit, not based on an old permit. If we left it as it is, it would have cost an extra $5 to $10 million to redesign the water reclamation facility to meet those requirements. So being able to negotiate those phases out of it probably saved $5 to $10 million on the project itself, because it would require an entirely new design to meet those stringent requirements. So we felt that was worth the $40,000. And you know, I don't know what the grant writing companies, maybe we should have hired that grant writer to do it, it would be cheaper. But we felt that that was an extra requirement we levied on A2S, and the 56,000 was worth it. So in our estimation was 180,000 out of the 271 that they requested. is an appropriate amount to reimburse them for the work that they put on this project.
May I make a comment first?
Absolutely.
Okay. The only thing I want to kind of caution us on this permitting with DEQ is that they're always thinking of ways to make it more stringent on us as time goes on. I'm wondering, do we have anything in writing with them that says for the life of this facility, that is going to be our permit requirement, or is it a yearly thing that they review?
It's not a yearly thing, but a regulatory agency is not going to put something in writing. The nice thing for all of us, though, is that they have the Yellowstone River modeled now, so they know what the accumulative effect of phosphorus, nitrogen, ammonia is as it continues to go downstream. And this is a case where we're lucky that we're at the headwaters of the Yellowstone River.
Right.
And that it's a large river, and there is a fair amount of dilution that goes into it as it flows downstream from Livingston.
Now, my understanding also is that, and I don't know if this was just kind of a passing jest from one of our consultants, is that the effluent that we put into the Yellowstone River a lot of times is actually cleaner than the river water. Is that a just statement or an accurate statement to a certain degree?
I would say it's an accurate statement. Absolutely. I think our community should be proud of the effluent that goes into the river. And when you look at all the septic systems and agricultural runoff and chemicals, mining, things of that nature that occur upstream of Livingston, we should be proud of the effluent that we're doing processing our wastewater.
And the last point is just a biological query, and that is, doesn't a moving river, what's the proper term, for lack of a scientific term, replenish and recleanse itself over a period of miles? Is that, I mean, it's actually.
Yes and no.
Yeah.
Certainly nitrogen, if the nitrogen limits were high, you're going to see an accelerated growth in vegetation in the river that could have a detriment to the aquatic life. But you know, the Yellowstone is a rather large flowing stream, and it is, I'm not going to use the word self-healing, but it can be a pretty stable body of water that can handle abrupt surface or chemistry changes, you know, in the water quality.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Sandberg?
Back on the grants, who's administering these grants? Are we going to get hit with another amendment later on when we actually start this process and somebody's got to actually administer these grants? Because that's a big component, is administering grants and loans.
Mr. Cardis?
We've already started that process. We're actually several payments into it. And if you refer back to Amendment 1, which I gave you in the last packet, that's covered in that Amendment 1.
With the construction management services?
Yes.
Okay. So we won't be hit with anything else?
Well, when we charge for it, but it's already in Amendment 1 that we've already budgeted for it.
Okay. And I guess I would just like to say, you know, I appreciate our Public Works Director's opinions on the pollutants that we provide to the river, but I don't believe any of us are actually biological scientists to speak accurately about the situation.
Okay, roll call, please.
Chairperson Bennett,
Yes.
Commissioner Vogler,
Yes.
Commissioner Friedman,
Yes.
Commissioner Schwartz,
Or
Commissioner Sandberg.
Against?
Motion passes. Our next and final resolution is resolution number 4772, a resolution of the city manager of the city commission of the city of Livingston, Montana, authorizing the city manager to enter into a professional service agreements for the Calendar and Main Street Capital Improvement Project. Mr. Cardis?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Obviously, this is the other one we looked at in the last meeting. This was in more of the The draft format, I think that was one of the things we talked about in the last meeting, was the difference between the first construction management contract and the second one. So this is the one that was in more of a draft format. However, I don't think, well, some of the numbers changed on you, so if you want to point that out, that by combining these, we did bring the overall construction management percentage down from, I think it was 12%, the original estimate, to 10.2. So again, this is a pay for service contract, not to exceed. So it is on an estimated amount of hours to do this project. If that goes under, we'll pay less. If it goes over, we'll pay more. Again, this is structured just like the last resolution that includes not only authorization to sign, but authorization to execute. In this case, the contingency is $24,000, added on to the $240,000 contract itself, for a total authorized cost not to exceed $264,651.90. And also written into the contract that way, as well as a resolution. Funding sources you can see in this one. This one's a little more complicated because it straddles fiscal years. So some of this is going to be fiscal year 2018 money. Some of this is going to be fiscal year 2019 money. We can see it was budgeted. There is about $33,000. I don't think that was not budgeted for this, so that's overage. But we do have the anticipated reserves in capital projects that weren't executed in 2017 to be able to pay those extra funds. I think that's all I have for your overview.
Thank you very much. Is there any public comment on resolution number 4772? Any public comment? Is there any commission comment? Clarification, questions for the administration? Commissioner Sandberg?
Well, no questions because I had already asked them from the city manager previous, but I thought it was odd that the proposal came with basically a spreadsheet and no real narrative on the scope of what they were expected to do. So when we look at an inspector for 61,000, a project manager for 18,000, you know, what are we expecting for that? What are they expecting?
Excuse me, can you tell us what page you're on?
Sorry, 76.
Okay.
Community meetings, how many community meetings is that? Shop drawings of what? And we have engineering drawings, I don't know what the shop drawings are. They did actually put together somewhat of a narrative for the 6th and 7th Street projects, which they provided back in the spring, but there's just no written scope of the project. We have an agreement, which is separate, and that's what's provided there. So I'm more comfortable approving things when I actually have a defined scope of work that I can approve. So I guess it's just more of a statement. So thank you.
Welcome. Mr. Cardos, do you have any illumination on that point?
I would just say there is a scope of work. It's just probably not in the format you used to see. So the spreadsheet is a scope of work. It tells you exactly what they're doing. And I actually wouldn't recommend defining that any further because you want a little bit of vagueness to hold the contractor accountable. If you define it too much, then anything that's outside of that, because really this is a construction management contract. So it's a teamwork between the actual construction company or whoever is doing the construction and the manager. If you get too detailed in the definitions of the scope and the construction company wants a different product or wants it in a different format, that's now outside the scope and you pay extra. Where if you just leave it a little more vague, that's still part of managing the construction contract and you can hold the construction management contractor accountable for that. In addition, it is a city engineer, so it's not an outside entity. We've worked on several projects with these. The scope is pretty well defined. If you look at those things, you know, what do you get for the inspector? Well, you look at the different inspections that they're going to have to do. Construction inspection was listed at 10,000 under the 9th and 10th Street sewer. There's construction inspections for 34,000 under the 6th and 7th Street water. This is on page 77. So, but it is in there. It's not, Commissioner Sandberg corrects, not in the narrative format that usually comes along with these. If the commission prefers a narrative format, we can go back to that. I actually thought this gave you a better idea, being able to see a snapshot of all the costs right there in front of you, so you can see what you're paying for total, as opposed to having to dig through verbiage for it. But if you prefer the verbiage format, we can certainly go back to that.
All right, is there any other, thank you very much. Is there any other commission clarification, discussion? Commissioner Bullen?
I just have a really simple question to start. What is nuke again?
It's a densometer, nuclear densometer, and it's how we determine that the aggregate or the gravel that we build our roads, compact our trenches, is at 95% compaction.
You just don't want to be the person holding it for very long.
Yeah, rumbling if you.
Any other commission discussion? Clarification? Okay. Is there a motion from the commission?
Make a motion we pass resolution 4772.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
So there's a motion by Commissioner Freeman, a second by Commissioner Hoagland. Roll call, please.
Chairperson Bennett,
Yes?
Commissioner Hoagland,
Yes.
Commissioner Friedman,
Yes.
Commissioner Schwartz,
Four.
Commissioner Sandberg.
Against.
Motion passes. All right. Time of the evening for public comment. If anyone wants to comment, please do, and keep it to 4 minutes tonight, please. Any public comment this evening? Please come on up. State your name and address for the record. Speak clearly into the microphone.
Patricia Grabo, 204 East Calendar Street. It was my understanding that tonight we were going to get some information about taking a foot away from the sidewalks. That wasn't requested at the last city commission meeting. I thought it was. I think you know. Right,
We requested it, but not this.
but
Not as an action item or anything, no.
not as an action item. I knew it wasn't going to be, but I just need we just want the information. I will say we were very glad to have met with the team last night. A number of downtown people were there, and I think they were very, very helpful. I would like to see us work much more collaborative with the downtown organizations as we proceed forward, particularly in the area of developing a parking plan. And I see that the newspaper mentioned that. We have a lot of talent. We have, for example, on our board, Downtown Building Owners Board, we have a former city planner. We have an enormous amount of talent in our 11 board members. So collaborative effort between the city and businesses downtown, I think, is very helpful. I want to make really quick comments. It's been since September that we've not been able to get either the packet or the agenda on the website. And a lot of people are really frustrated with that because we really would like to see the agenda. We would like to be able to look at the packet on the website, and it's been since September 25th. Every time you go to your page, the city commission page, we see September 25th as agenda, and it doesn't speak well for our city not to have this done. It isn't that big a job.
That's our New Year's resolution.
That's a lovely one. Thank you so much. And sound as well. A lot of people try to hear these meetings. A lot of people are trying to participate in their government, and it is hard if you're trying to listen to it at home and you can't hear what people are saying. So I would just encourage, if there's any chance as a New Year's resolution, it could be done early in the year, would certainly be appreciated. Number 3, I did follow through more on that $2 million that the Livingston Restoration Group could be responsible for on the water treatment plant. I talked to the judge involved in the case, and he said I need to write a letter. So I will do that. In addition, I have some sad news. And I spoke with Peggy Weisgerber, whose husband, as you know, is trying to get through the holidays. He's dying of cancer, and he wants not to destroy his family this Christmas. He worked for 6 years at KPRK before the time when we had not developed mitigation of the carcinogenic plume. And there is a possibility that he contracted the cancer by drinking the water at KPRK. Currently, they may not allow a single person in there for more than 6 hours in that KPRK building. So we have good news and bad news. This community has worked hard to mitigate a carcinogenic plume. We have $16 million that was specifically meant only to mitigate the plume. $20 million went back to the co-litigants already. There are a number of co-litigants, and I will send you their narrative. We're on the board for the Livingston Restoration Group, who would just soon not spend the money on mitigating the plume, and then have it come back to them as it had happened in Sunburst, Montana, where they sat on the money and then the money went back to the co-litigants rather than using that money to mitigate the plume. We as a city have $2 million approximately. We'll know the amount better soon that is due our city from that $16 million lawsuit. We need to use it to come back to the citizens of this community to offset the cost of the water treatment plant. $2 million on that water treatment plant is a lot of money. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patricia. Thank you for keeping us up to date on that. Is there any other public comment this evening? Yes, please come forward.
On behalf of Livingston, I'd like to thank Commissioner Bennett for 8 years of service, and the best of luck when he returns to being Mr. Bennett. Thank you. Bye.
Oh, thank you, Warren. Appreciate that. Is there any other public comment? All right. City manager comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And we're under 2 hours, so I can talk as long as I want. Just a few things I'd like to update the commission on. We are in the process of working with the Park County Community Foundation. We are engaged in them with a program called the Early Childhood Coalition. Services 0 to 8-year-olds. We're involved in quite a few activities with the rec center. Right now we're looking at expanding that partnership with them. It's completely grant funded. It should be budget neutral for the city, but we're looking to being a little more closely entwined with that program and offering some more assistance to them. So that's just something we should look for in the next month or so. We should probably have a memorandum of understanding with the Park County Community Foundation that'll come before you for approval. So I'll keep you updated on that as we go. Additionally, just a reminder that we have the tour tomorrow at 10 o'clock for the commission, and Commissioner-elect Navy, you're more than welcome to come to that if you have the time to go through the water reclamation facility, see the progress to be put on by Dick Anderson. So they'll walk us through it and give you any updates that you have available at that time. The last one is just kind of a food for thought one. We probably shortly after the new year are going to start the bargaining process with both the MPEA union as well as the International Firefighters Union. So if they're in absence of any other guidance, I will assume that I'll be doing those negotiations, and we'll start those as necessary. If there's a different avenue the commission would like, we'll have to make that decision soon. And then lastly, since Warren and Commissioner Samar are the only ones, we have a small gift for Chairman Bennett as he's leaving. This is from the commission and the city, and we would like you to open it in front of everyone. We'd like everyone to see what it is.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it. A lot of beautiful colored paper. Like here. It's the gavel. All right. We're retiring this one. Oh, wow, a little plaque too.
So you can bang it.
Thanks.
Oh, well, how nice. You covered up all the dents.
What does it say on it?
Says, James Bennett, thank you for your service, 2010, 2017, the city of Livingston. Well, thank you very much. Beautiful packaging. I'll take this home and use it for a gift for someone else. Thank you. Thank you very much. That's very thoughtful. The staff and the commission that pulled that together, appreciate that. So, commission comments, starting with Commissioner Sandberg.
I just want to thank you, James, for your service for the years. It's hard work. You were very diligent. And, thank you. And I did bring cake.
I thought that was for the fire.
So everyone, please grab a piece, audience, everyone, and hang out with James after the meeting for a little bit. I would have bought adult beverages, but I know James doesn't like adult beverages. But anyway, so.
Well, I actually would like to see other.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you
Appreciate it.
very much.
Commissioner Schwartz.
Yes, thank you for your service. It's been fun watching you evolve since the beginning till now. I've really enjoyed it. Didn't we move our meeting to January 4th, or are we still having it on second?
That was suggested, but I didn't, you have made a decision as commission on when I'm going to.
I'll second that.
Yeah, I make a motion that January's meeting will be on the 4th.
Okay, all in favor? Say aye.
Before I say yes, hang on.
That will change it. January 2nd is the first Tuesday of the month, which is the day immediately following the holiday.
Right. So
January
we'll
4th
put
is
it
that
to the 4th, Thursday.
Yeah.
I'll be in rehab by
As a Christmas present, January is about to get the extra week without the commission. So
Oh, yeah.
there's 3 weeks of January. So.
Which everyone marks on their calendars with relish.
I guess that's all I have. Thank you.
Is everyone else fine with January 4th?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Putting that right now.
Okay. Sounds good. All right. Mr. Friedman.
Yes, I want to thank you, James, for, that's a long time.
Yes, this last year felt like a long time. Yeah, sure. Thank you.
And I want to wish everybody a safe holiday and joyous holiday, and looking forward to a real good year. So, that's it.
Thank you, Mr. Hope.
I have a question as to where something is, or pertaining to a future agenda, and that is when the recommendations will be made as far as the traffic study results and signage in particular.
So that is probably going to be a second meeting in January. And that will be just to give the priorities. It's not going to be a comprehensive funding schedule, but we can at least look at the, prioritize them, see which ones, kind of give a rough estimate on cost and try and figure out what the priority should be at that point.
Okay. And then I want to thank James as well. One of the things that I have to say is when I first ran for city commission 4 years ago, or so years ago, I think most people would have said they could never see us working well together. Mostly because people assumed that we were something that we weren't. But I'd say that you're one of the better coworkers I've ever worked with, so I really appreciate it.
Oh, wow. Well, thank you very much. Is this getting recorded? I'm gonna get a copy.
Yeah.
Play
You can watch it. Go home and watch it.
Yeah, I know it.
Oh,
Just
and
have it play.
thank- and thank
Oh, you're welcome. Welcome. Well, it's been a wonderful but long 8 years. I'm looking forward to a different change in my life at this point. But I wanted to thank, the present commission and all the commissioners I've served with for the last 8 years, and thank them for their service as well. It's been a pleasure working with everyone. Want to thank the administration and for enduring with us for that length of time. Those who have made it through here with us for the last 8 years. And it was sometimes I wonder if I learn more than I actually contributed. This is a really big learning process. Seems like I'm learning more than every day, but I really appreciate and thank the community and for the opportunity to serve this fine community and everyone in it. And I wish everyone a happy holidays, a Merry Christmas, a Happy Hanukkah, and whatever you celebrate at the holidays. Kwanzaa, yeah. And have a safe holiday as well. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay.
And thank you, Commission and Administration, for the kind words and the wonderful gavel I can use at home. This will be good. Unfortunately, I needed it probably about 8 years ago when my two boys were a little younger. Yeah. Now they're a lot more well-behaved. So, time for this meeting to adjourn. Is there a motion for adjournment? Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye. And please join us for a little bit of the chief's cake over there. This meeting of the Livingston City Commission is adjourned at 8:19.
Yes, I am. Had her ups and downs.